Welcome to our talk once again, Deja Vu. Today's exploration is going to be slightly different than the kinds of lectures that we usually have, in the sense that it's going to look at the history of one of our favorite exhibitions, The Place as a Metaphor. It came out so good the first time. I hope I could do it justice again. So The Place as Metaphor has been with us for 6 rotations, and what that means is it's been on display for 6 seasons. So it opened to the public in January of 2019, and it just closed down now this past April 2021. But its development started a little differently than what you would expect, and it serves as a great example of what we mean when we say that the Cornell is a teaching museum, because it grew from a partnership with a class at Rollins College. And so in 2018, my colleague, Dr. Gisela Carbonell, she's our curator at the museum, worked with a class called Museum Practicum that was spearheaded by Dr. Mackenzie Moon Ryan over in the Art History Department at Rollins College, to develop this exhibition that later grew very long legs due to its popularity and its relatability with general public, and later became what we would think of as a permanent collection exhibition. But we'll get to that in just a bit. So in 2018, this class in the fall used the museum's collection to develop an exhibition, and that's kind of the core of the class. It's all about having all the students work collaboratively with staff at the museum, with the professor as a guiding mentor through the process, to put together an exhibition that is actually open to the public. So it's a pretty exciting thing to do at the undergraduate level, really at any level, but especially at the undergraduate level. And so this first rotation, which would have been from January till the end of the semester, so April of 2019, was kind of the product of this deep exploration, right? So in 2018, and what you're seeing here in this image is the title wall of that opening first rotation. The students work together to look at certain things, such as investigating the different objects that were going to be featured in the exhibition. So that requires that they work with not just our curator, Gisela Carbonell, but also our exhibitions and collections manager, Austin Reeves, to look for pieces that fit in well. Or if you're starting before a narrative, to look at all the work that you have available to you and start to kind of find similarities between pieces so that you can find a narrative. Once you've done so, you start identifying any underlying themes that will be discussed throughout the exhibition, and you're going to be seeing those through didactics such as labels and wall texts, like the intro panel that you see kind of back here in the background. And all of these were a team effort, with the students doing a lot of research into the artists' lives, into the meanings of the work, and integrating those across all of the different works to kind of see what narratives popped out and worked. And then after that, once all the academic scholarly work is out of the way, there's a need to see the exhibition and the space. What's it going to look like? And so for that, they pick wall colors. They have in-depth meetings. Progress here so you can see some of the work that went on behind the scenes. This is the students in the classroom with our curator, Dr. Carbonell, here. And at this point, they're pretty far into it at this point. As you can see here, this is a mock-up of one of the galleries, and this was a very large show. It took up our two largest galleries were dedicated to it. And you see here, they're in the process of making color selections, which is always, as someone who will willingly paint her house 8 times a year, this is always a very fun process, right? So looking at small thumbnails of all the different artworks and seeing what colors help tie them all together. And then there were also, once the artworks were selected, and this one did have some supplemental works. They weren't just from our collection, the bulk of them were, but others came either from private collections or also through the Art Bridges Foundation. So once those kinds of works would come in, you see here on the left-hand side, you have to do condition reporting. So it's a pretty specialized process where you look at the condition of the work as they come into your space so that you can kind of chart that nothing happens to it while it is your care, that it is leaving the same way that it came in. And what you see here is our collections manager, Austin, using like a UV light to look deeply into the painting with one of the students in the classwork. And then here we see in the other image, this looks like a lecture of some sort. So, and that's Dr. Moonray in there, that she spearheaded the class. So just kind of showing all the different purposes and learning opportunities that come from this class and also from the byproduct, which is this exhibition. And so with this first rotation of the places metaphor, again, very large, 60 plus works. That's borderline overwhelming when you walk into, right? So you really have to help the visitor, and they were very sensitive to that. And so what they did to help navigate this space was under the subheading of places metaphor, which the theme, I explained it the first time, but you couldn't hear me, so I'm going to say it again now because I didn't the second time. But places metaphor really explores the theme of place and how we can unpack that and interpret it in all of its many capacities. But there are a lot of ways to do that, right? So what our student curators did was come up with sub-themes, and that helped group some of the works in different areas of the galleries to help you kind of navigate the space. And so we have Beyond the Immediate, which is things that exist outside of our physical space, right? So the imagined space or outer space. I see here one of my favorite works in the collection by Sandra Ramos. And it is a young girl who is a physical representation of both the artist and the cultural collective of her native land of Cuba, looking through a telescope to the outer space. So, right, so it's beyond the immediate terrestrial ground that we live and inhabit on Earth. But then it explores, again, outside consciousness. And it's a way of bringing that theme together within a select number of works. Another theme, this is, I see more fantastic work here, is devotion. So thinking of the religious and the sacred space and what that looks like. Here we have a photograph by Marcus Brunetti, who's one of my favorite artists in our collection, of these hyper-realistic shots composed of hundreds and thousands of photographs of churches, but I believe with this series he was working within the range of 11th to 13th century, if I recall. So taking these old historic, borderline ancient structures, and he photoshops the images to remove any semblance of modern life or people. So they're desolate, and they almost feel like they were just built yesterday. So it's a cool play on the sacred space scene devoid of the outer contexts of secular life, which is a neat meta way of looking at places metaphor. But that's paired with other paintings, like this one's also from our collection here. This is Doris Sleeper, or by the artist Doris Sleeper, I believe it's called Olive Windows. And this one over here, which is parts of like altar pieces that have been pieced together, but they reflect saints. So more traditional devotional spaces in their function as previously being connected to altar pieces, but also in their narratives. So it shows the wide range even within these sub-themes that we had. These are two other themes. You have here on the left, the city, and on the right, the landscape. So these are a little more straightforward, right? the city as a space, which is both physical but also experiential, right? Because city life, as a point of contrast to landscapes, and that country life is going to have a lot of there's a lot of differences in those experiences, and both, again, geographically, if we think of the kind of scenes that we see and what that means for what the day-to-day life in those spaces would feel like. And then we also, going back a little less literal, the artist experience. So thinking of artist connection to place, but it could be a historical place, or it could be a physical space, and really just kind of focusing on the artists and what they're representing and how and why. So really the object as exploration to the artist's psychological or lived experience. And then we had the politics of place, a space where I feel very comfortable. A lot of you might recognize this work here in the corner on the left-hand side. Patrick Martinez's Then They Came For Me. This was in one of our exhibitions for the last year in the front gallery. So hopefully lots of you guys got to see it. But that one, as an example, kind of deals with possibly connecting trans-historical spaces. So it's made as the quote comes from someone that lived during World War II. It was a Protestant pastor or reverend that was anti-Semitic and a supporter of the Nazis until they kind of turned against him and his world. And so he started to oppose them, and he was quite vocal about it. And so it kind of looks at the politics of that place, Germany, during that time, World War II. But then if we looked up to the other side, this picture on the right, we have, works by Andy Warhol, Sitting Bull over here. We have this one over here by Edgar Heap of Birds. And so these are really about the politics of the person in relation to their lived experience, or the place that they're connected to, the politics of that. So a wonderful and rich theme. And so what we saw beforehand were all the different spaces that were explored during that first rotation, right? But then eventually it moved out of those two galleries as one of our special exhibitions. And because it was so popular, and because it's so malleable and you can include so many different narratives in it, it was moved into Clive, which is our permanent collection gallery. And at this point, it is just works from our collection and our Alphon collection. And it takes on a different life because now they're not separated by subcategories. They're all coexisting. And so the malleability of that metaphor becomes more pronounced because now you are directly engaged with a piece that maybe their sense of place is completely different than the one next to it. So it's forcing you to make these trans-historical and trans-cultural connections, which is a great exercise in critical thinking, honestly. And I can speak for example because I use this in my teaching. I use this gallery a lot. I'm gonna miss it. I already do miss it because it's gone. But here we see our curator again, Hasela, teaching a class, and so we start seeing how these suddenly you don't have those subcategory texts. They're just kind of coexisting. So, for instance, and now we're going to look at a couple of my favorite works, only in the rotations that I have been there for, because I didn't get to see all of them, unfortunately. But in this wall here, we happen to have two works that are dealing with, again, that idea of devotional secret space next to a completely secular work on this side. But what I think is cool is that once your brain starts to think more in a more holistically, but in a more expanded way, even within a single image, you can start kind of piecing apart different ways that narrative of place exists within just the one work. So for instance, Madonna Enthroned, Nursing the Christ Child by Cosimo Rosselli. originally would have existed within that sub-theme of devotional space, right? And we kind of just take it at face value. It's, you know, the narrative of a religious setting within what appears to be a Garden of Eden of sorts. So kind of that metaphysical place of religious sanctity as well, right? Heavenly almost. But then it also, through that alone, it's already kind of fitting into that other category of beyond the immediate, right? So we see that, again, you can play with how you interpret this. But also, aside from those two, we have the fact that this Madonna is nursing this child, right? So we have the body as place, if we think in terms of a woman's body as being the place and site of the origin of life, right? So place in that way. But she's also on a throne. So we're kind of making connections to leadership of some form, and the fact that we're highlighting the breast and the act of, of nursing kind of connects this image to the idea of being like a heavenly mother to the collective of humanity. So in that sense, you have a further expanded view of place, parenthood as place, and the range of how parents and the interaction between parent and child, not just within your immediate lived experience, but if you stretch it into a religious space, just kind of that maker and believer, that following that kind of space. So it's layered for sure, and it's a good way to explore topics that we might not have gotten to explore in any of the original spaces. So another shot from when this moved over into the permanent collection, and here we see another of my favorite works. I told you that, well, I did tell you the first time, again, you didn't hear it, but I said this was going to be a completely biased exploration of works from the last two rotations that are just, or the last three that are my favorite works. So I hope that's fine. But this work over here, we're going to look at a little deeper. Jean-Quic de C. Smith, where do we come from? And here, place. Okay, so we see a map of the United States. That's the low-hanging fruit, right? So we've established this is going to be place in terms of the U.S. and this terrain. But this is what Jean-Quic de C. Smith calls a countermap. So it's actually activist art at its finest, and it deals with the indigenous struggle for basically, you know, Western genocide and the way that, you know, lands were robbed. And it's kind of a comment on, you know, that lingering colonial legacy that is part of, so inherently tied to US history. And so what I think is cool is when we're thinking of place here, it's not just the US place, yes, but it's transhistorical, thinking of, you know, the US or the land that is now what we call the US, having a pre and a post. And so it's those spaces, but it's also the imagined space of what could have been for these Native communities had Western colonialism never happened to begin with, but if it had happened in a different way. So it's the imagined live space of a second parallel existence, so to speak. But then along those lines, you also do have the overlapping histories of place, and how, you know, just because one was heavily confined to these small spaces and basically extinguished from the lineage as that Western lineage and narrative took over, the other one was still there. It's always been there. So it's placed as a space of coexistence as well. So again, one of those works that can be jumped into and explored in very surprising ways. And then something that happened serendipitously was because of this influx definition of place as connected to individual experience. You have works that meant one thing, but then because of changing times within our society, suddenly got new meanings attached. And one of them is this piece that we see back here by Rafael Treyes, La Autopista del Sur, Southern Highway. And the work itself is a direct, kind of like an illustration, fantastic illustration of the story of the same name, Southern Highway, by our Argentine writer Julio Cortázar. And the place that's being explored both in the book and in this painting is this confined space, because the plot of what is happening here with all these cars is that these cars are all trapped on a Parisian highway at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. No one knows what's causing this traffic jam. They're just there. And, because it is fiction, they're not there for an hour or two. They're there for what appears to be days and months and possibly years, because time is suspended, and that's part of the story. And so that's that place in terms of this location of this highway, but also the imagined place of fictional narrative. But then, because this was on display during COVID, specifically the semester that we allowed students to come back on site for the fall of 2020, this was one that gained a lot of interest because suddenly students were identifying the metaphor of place within that space of interior, or that place of interiority, because suddenly this was not so fictional anymore, right? We understood the loneliness and isolation of confined spaces. We understood the idea of unreliable news and explanations coming to us. That's part of, woven into the narrative of the story, where no one knows why they're there, how long they've been there, or for how much longer. Certainly the suspension of time is something everyone understood. So it's something that we didn't expect, but because the theme of place is so present in everything that we do, it's one of these fantastic add-ons, not for great reasons, right? No one is happy COVID happened, but it did add a layer, and that's something that happens with art so often, which is one of the most rewarding reasons to teach with art in the first place. And so this is the last rotation, the sixth and final rotation that we had up in the spring of this year. And we're gonna end. So you see here, this little doorway, this whole space will not be there for much longer. And this is a viewing room, because we're gonna end with my favorite piece from this entire exhibition, as long as I've been here, at least. And that is, these are the last couple of images from our last install. But that is this piece, and it's actually a video piece. I'm not going to tempt the technological fates and attempt to play this, which is why there is a link in the chat to the foundation page of this artist's page, so you can watch the entire video. It's like 6 minutes long, definitely worth it. But I did include some stills. And I say this is my favorite. Well, number one, because I'm a film junkie, so anything that's a film installation, I'm gonna like. But number two, because I think this one really impacted me in terms of thinking of place in a way that I hadn't before. And the purpose of the narrative is you have this guy, Jens Danielson. He's an Inuit hunter, and he has come from his home down to Paris in 2015 for the Paris COP21 climate conference. And the reason, that he's dressed in this way, as you could see, he's in full Inuit hunting gear. He's brought his sled, which at one point in the film gets, because they're trying to make a connection to Paris, the sled is being led by poodles, which is probably one of the best clips. I didn't include it because it cut off. I was all poodle legs, and that would have been weird, but do watch it because it's great. But the whole idea is that the world is so interconnected in terms of its climate. We are one giant ecosystem, and places like where he's from, Greenland, are suffering. They're seeing immediate results of climate change and global warming, and it's affecting their day to day. You know, the sea level rise is bad everywhere, but there it's on a different level where it's affecting, you know, it's affecting their commerce, it's affecting their living structures, because all their homes are made on permafrost, and that's melting. So it's the foundations of their homes are shifting and falling. Suddenly, you know, if you were an ice fisher and you were a hunter in these capacities, suddenly your season's a lot shorter, and now, you know, how do you get by, how do you live? So it just permeates through every aspect of their lives in a way that we can't relate to further south. And so he comes to Paris as a visual interruption, as he's walking through Paris dressed like this with a sled. I think there's ice on the sled. I'm not sure what's packaged up, but that would make sense if it's ice. And so it's a reminder to kind of pause and say, you know, what's happening to them is going to happen. And that's the second line after this one that says, "So I have come to your beautiful city." It's to let you know that this will happen to you eventually, and it's already happening. You just don't see it to the degree that we do. So it's a great way to remind us that we are one world. And I say that hoping it doesn't sound corny, but we are actually, scientifically speaking, one world, and what we do in one place affects everywhere else. So there has to be a greater consciousness for our actions. So I hope you do click on the link, and that's all I have for you today. What can I say? Places Metaphor was such a wonderful, rewarding exhibition that really, at least to me, helped me think a little bit differently about art. And it has been a pleasure to teach with it. And I will say, like I said, I'm new to Rollins, I'm new to the Cornell. I've only been here a couple months, but when I first came on site for my interview, it was one of the exhibitions that really kind of lit a bulb in my head that this was a good place to be, because it does unpack these very large ideas in such a interdisciplinary way that makes them so easy to grasp and expanding in positive ways. So I hope you got to see them while they were up. And I want to thank the students in Dr. Moon Ryan's practicum class, and Dr. Carbonell and Austin Reeves for all their amazing work in sharing or bringing this exhibition to life and sharing it with all of us. And the good thing is, posthumously, so to speak, you can go into the exhibition section of our website, and if you look for Places Metaphor, at the very bottom of the page, there will be a 360 virtual gallery link, so you can at least walk through the spaces of the last two rotations, the one that would have happened the one that existed in fall of 2020 and now in the spring of 2021. So it'll live on through digital innovation. So thank you for joining me today, and if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. And again, I do encourage you to use the link and to go watch this film. And if there aren't any questions, then thank you for spending your morning with me, and I look forward to seeing you back at the museum when we reopen on the 20th of this month.